So my name's Lou Vivas with Viva Life Properties. I'm here with Matt Rowan. Thanks for being here
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me be here with you. Actually,
Yeah, I'm excited. This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
this is my thing. So,
yeah. So Matt is a lighting design expert, and in particular, with Viva the Healthy Life, we're working on trying to really equip people to make their homes healthy. And the 5 pillars of making your home healthy: air, water, food, lighting, and temperature control. And so what we're going to talk about is really, wrapping our head around lighting and how important that is to our health,
Yep.
in our sleeping patterns, our wakefulness, everything. And of course, in how it affects the ambiance and the beauty of our homes.
Yeah.
Because I do like to tell people that, our homes are architecture or art we live in. So it's a space that where we're enjoying our lives, and it is art, and it should be artful because it totally impacts our mood and how we view life.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and I could not agree more. I think the other thing too is our homes are there's like a feedback loop in it.
Mm-hmm.
They're a reflection of ourselves. So when people come in, they actually make judgments on you, kind of like who you are based upon what you see in the house. And we are constantly looking to our surroundings as well as what we've created to actually decide who we are as well. It's a constant fluid process. So we actually do find that if people feel happy in a house that is beautiful, that is reflective of maybe not who they are, but almost who they want to be. We see this happen a lot. That actually pushes them a little bit further towards that ideal state. And in some cases, there's that saying people talk about: if there's a mess around you, it impacts your mental state.
Yeah.
Your house is sometimes a view to the interior of your mental state. So you might as well make it, beautiful. So
Yeah. No doubt about it. Like, not only does it impact our mood, it impacts our wakefulness, it impacts our the feeling that we experience when we're just everyday living. And especially during COVID, we've really experienced a shift where we're spending just about all of our time in our home. But even before COVID and after COVID, more so after COVID than before COVID, we're spending so much time in our homes. And so one of the things that one of my friends, I'm big on holistic medicine,
Yep.
and my holistic doctor, along with a very good friend of mine, recommend is for me to get up early in the morning and walk outside and experience the sun in my eyes, and just like triggering my circadian rhythm, kind of triggering my wakefulness and setting my internal clock. And so what I love about what we're about to delve into is the importance of how we can kind of emulate or the solar cycle in our home.
Yep.
to enhance our lives.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this concept of bio tweaking, but we can do it by engaging our actual home and tweaking our own internal biology, which is pretty fascinating.
No. And I think the biggest thing that I can tell people is it can sometimes feel overwhelming about what you want to do. I think if you just kind of true back to this idea of the more that we can make our interior environments like the exterior environment, with all the different cycles, all the different things that are happening, the better off we are. So from a lighting standpoint, we really want to try to mimic the oldest light source that we kind of evolved with, right? Which is the sun. And so what that means is that, if you're talking about just mimicking that, we're talking about the differences in color at different times of day. We're talking about the differences of position, where your light is coming from at different times of day. And I think the other thing too is variety. So we were never designed as organisms to be static in just one spot, which means that even the exposure that we have to the light that's out there should change throughout the day. When we do talk about biomimicry, they're even talking about approximating dappled sunlight, actually changing the environment throughout the day. So, we can focus on the idea of getting the color temperature right. So it's a little bit softer, maybe a little pinker and bluer in the mornings, super blue and white during the middle of the day. And then when it's time to relax, it's golden and more coming from the sides. We can get that right, but then we have to vary that throughout the day, because we were never meant to just be stuck in one position. We're not like, a tree where we're kind of rooted to the ground. We're meant to be mobile.
Let's do this when we're because we're gonna edit this. Let's and people are gonna be viewing it. Let's talk more to the screens.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay.
And so I'll ask a question. You can look at me.
I don't want to be like antisocial.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. So no, but this is perfect. So let's delve let's delve more into the three things that you just mentioned. The temperature of the lighting and the position and the different types, the
intensity.
The intensity.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think
or actually, could you restate the three different things
Sure.
about lighting that are important?
Yeah. So an easy way of remembering some of the fundamental components of lighting, and to help you actually make decisions on it, are to think about three things. One is the color, which you think about that like the song, right? One is the intensity. That's our volume knob, how much we're turning that song up or down. And then variety and position. So that's how much we kind of change that song up. We're not playing the same one all day long, just at different intensities. And we also want to change the position of the light. The fundamental thing behind it is we're trying to mimic the natural world. So what that means is the sun as it rises is coming from the sides, right? And it's a little bit pinker. The color temperature is kind of fairly soft. Then as it's right above us, it is at its peak intensity. So right, our volume knob is turned up to 11. The color temperature of it is its whitest and its bluest. And then as it starts to set, it actually goes back to coming from the side and becomes more golden. When we do talk about color temperature, it's a term you'll see a lot. It's also a term you'll see when you're selecting bulbs, even at the grocery store or supermarket. What the color temperature is a way that they measure the overall color in Kelvin. So, while we normally see like Fahrenheit as something that we do with like pure actual temperature of the air, Kelvin is how we measure color temperature in lighting. And also think of it like a flame. So the lower the color temperature, the more like a candle it is, so it's a little bit more golden, it's kind of softer. And then as we go all the way up towards the top end of that Kelvin measurement sort of cycle, if you will, or that threshold, it's a jet engine, right? It's super blue, super white. It's a very, very hot flame. So what people are normally used to is 2700 K. That's 2700 Kelvin. That is pretty much identical to like an old school 60 watt bulb. And that used to be all that we had, right? We didn't really have much option as far as what the color temperature was. When LEDs came out onto the market, all of a sudden we had this whole threshold of things that we could tweak. So they did kind of a bad job, and it's one of the reasons why LEDs kind of got a bad rap, is when they put this stuff out on the market, they were saying terms that didn't really mean a lot, where it was like, bright white, clean white, crisp white, daylight. And when folks are talking about getting light into their spaces, you're like, oh yeah, of course I want daylight. The sun sounds great. Problem is, we don't really understand how blue and harsh that is. And the thing to keep in mind is, in most residential environments, when we're using artificial lighting is when it's towards the end of the day, when our natural source of light is going away, which means towards the end of the day, we want to be more golden. So the worst thing that you can actually have before you're trying to get to sleep, before you're trying to kind of settle down, is this signal, if we just have our light coming from right above, that it's high noon, right? The sun is at its brightest, it's at its peak, all of this light is coming from right above you. And it really messes up our sleep-wake cycles. We've had clients actually come to us and say like, hey, I swapped out all my bulbs in my house for the cool white bulbs because I thought, hey, that would be great. And I'm not sleeping. So it actually has an effect. I think most of us are aware of seasonal affective disorder. It is a documented psychiatric disorder that is based upon exposure to light and within the season. And for the most part, its treatment is light. So even something like that just is something that's saying that this is not a theory. This is actually a medically documented fact. And to your point, the more we can get things to the natural cycle, the happier our bodies will be. Our bodies haven't evolved out of needing what's in the outside world. We've just quickly, evolved to create these artificial environments, and we just haven't been as careful about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's actually kind of delve into that. So, what does our body need, and ultimately we need to, we're striving to be healthy.
Yeah,
we're striving to be healthy. So, what does light mean for your health?
So light definitely makes that impact on your circadian rhythm that we've talked about. So your sleep and wake cycles, it tells you when to be awake. that also makes a change to your emotional state. So we actually talk about levels of physical sort of energizing, right? So we talk about blood pressure kind of going up along with our heart rates. When we get to our resting heart rate cycle, which we want to be either at or certainly below when we're sleeping, that tends to actually have an impact on, or that is impacted by our actual light. I'm stuttering, but it's all fine. You'll edit all that stuff out. So all of that input.
So wait, our blood pressure and our
heart rate,
our heart rate,
yep,
impacted by lights.
Yes, and we'll also even things that they can measure with like electrodes and things like galvanic skin response, even the dilation of our pupils. Right, more dilated, more light is coming into our optical nerves. Actually means that we are more relaxed, we are more engaged in particularly in interpersonal conversation. Whether or not we actually know it, when we're conversing with someone and we're kind of connecting with them, our pupils do dilate, right? And this is a level of kind of relaxation, and they tend to contract when they don't. And so all of that is based on light levels. Wow. So it makes a big impact, and I will say our eyes directly connect to our brain. Right, so that
they're like extensions of our brain, actually.
They definitely are. There's specific areas of our brain that are dedicated only to visual, and so we have tiny little blind spots in our eyes where our retinal nerves connect. Which is actually, I mean, for me being kind of a geek with all of this stuff, that's where our mind will actually fill in those gaps based on guesswork. So we have
this is why eyewitness accounts aren't the best thing.
Not at all, not at all. So so we fill in a lot of gaps. Our brain does a lot of processing and guessing of what we need to do. If we were able to, like a camera, take in all of the input that was coming in, visual, auditory, stimuli, all at the same time, and our brain wasn't filtering it out for what it thought was important, we would just be like dead on the savannah, right? We would be kind of collapsed and freaked out.
Information overload.
It would be information overload, and then the saber-toothed tiger would come and get us. So we would not have survived. So for this, light really is critical, right? It's coming directly into the brain. It is influencing the way that we see things. And one of the largest components of our experience is visual, right? We know that there are a lot of other things that we're taking in, but if we talk about, it's almost like a pie chart. So much of it really is visual. And we think about language visually, right? We visualize things. And when we do talk about actual language, we think about the way that we use terms like bright, illuminated, things like that. They're for emotional states. They're for describing people as to whether or not they're intelligent. So whether or not we know it, we're actually acknowledging the importance of light through our use of language.
Okay. Yeah, I'm reading a book called Regenerate, and it talks about by Sarah G. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's great. So one of the other things that he discusses is, our bodies are basically made out of 75% water. Yeah. And so basically we're walking crystals, and, we're actually very similar to plants, able to, there's structured lighting, or there's structured water that's able to take light, like a plant's able to take light and turn it into energy in our bodies. And so this is one of the reasons why when we eat food, we should be eating more food with plant blood. In other words, chlorophyll, because chlorophyll enables our body with melanin. I think it's
melanin is the coloration.
That colorate melanin. It enables us to transfer the energy of the light in our body to make it something that useful. In other words, turn it into energy for us. So, I mean, it goes back to seasonal, disorder, because we're getting less light from the outside, and it's affecting our energy levels. This is a real thing. We're actually more like plants than we realize. We're meant to take in light. Now, here's an interesting thing. So, we're in a space, and we're trying to create an atmosphere like being outside, high temperature lighting. That's where you get vitamin D. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's actually from some of the ultraviolet radiation, I believe, within the light wavelength. So when you're dealing with full wavelength light, which is 100% is in the out of doors, what we call it is CRI. It's color rendering index. So full spectrum light is 100, right, on that scale, and that's the sun.
Okay.
As you actually go down in the color rendering index, you become less and less accurate as far as the different colors that you're representing with the light that's reflected back at you. The body can tell that.
Okay.
And it's not just obvious, it's actually kind of like a subconscious thing.
Oh,
But you
wow.
also look for that when you're looking at bulbs. LEDs don't actually reflect all of the spectrum. So what happens is, because they're kind of piecing together light from artificial sources. So it's not we're burning a filament and we're getting that full spectrum of light from that filament burning. We're adding individual things. It's almost like not eating food, but instead taking individual vitamins. It's really easy to miss out on something completely because the body's used to take everything in.
Right.
If you just take artificial little components, which LED lights really started as, that CRI is lower than 80, sometimes to 70, which is not good. Things are illuminated, but they seem muddy. They don't seem quite right. So the body is able to pick that up. So,
Well, real quick, CRI, could you?
yep, color rendering index.
Okay.
Yep. And so that is another thing. You know, if you're getting really into the source of lights that you choose, particularly ones that are over things like artwork, where color is really important. The higher the CRI, the closer to 100, the closer we are to natural sources like the sun, and the richer that light is in the color that it reflects. So that's definitely kind of a big thing.
Now, aren't there lights for seasonal affective disorder?
Yep.
Aren't there lights that not only help us overcome that, but actually supposedly provide us with vitamin D?
Yeah, so there are they're what they call sun lamps. So they actually used to do this in some really northern countries, Russia, some of the Scandinavian countries, where kids during the day actually had to be exposed to this this ultraviolet light to be able to stimulate the body's production of vitamin D, which again is critical for the metabolism of calcium. So we already know that light is one of those things that had been used. Phototherapy is actually one of it. They also treat skin conditions. I believe it's psoriasis with vitamin D. So that is another thing that definitely impacts it. So when we're talking about that full spectrum, that is what we want to expose people who are dealing with seasonal affective disorder. It is a result of not being exposed to enough quantities of light. So most of the phototherapy lamps that they use for seasonal affective disorder, they used to be fluorescent and fairly high color temperature and fairly intense. They wanted it fairly close to your face. So it's almost like you're mega dosing yourself with a high level of that lighting. Because your system was depressed. So you don't have enough of that energy that's kind of within your system. You don't have enough activity amongst your neurons in the brain that are triggered by that exposure to light.
Interesting. Now, is there lighting that we can add to a house naturally, like, as part of the housing design?
Yes.
To mimic that type of exposure?
Yeah, so remember those three sort of critical things about lighting, right? So there's the color, there's the position, and there's the intensity. And all three of those things we want to use to try to mimic sunlight. So when you're waking up in the morning, if you don't want to have kind of a sudden jolt of waking up, and no one really likes that, it's kind of like we're under attack. You actually ramp lighting up. And if you can, you start from the side. So when we talk about good lighting of a space, we want to make sure that light is usually coming from three different directions, three different types of sources. So overhead is definitely one of those. That's the easiest one. That's what most people have in their house. And then we talk about kind of a lower level where we're talking about floor lamps, table lamps, things within the space. And then an additional level that's kind of like a little bit of a lower level of sparkle. So those are small accent lights that you might tuck into a bookshelf or on a credenza. So they're not there to illuminate the space so you can walk around. They're there to provide additional sources of lighting. So as you decrease what's happening overhead, those guys become a little bit more prominent and we start to approximate sunset, things that are happening at the horizon. So there's definitely that. Intensity and ramp ups are a part of it. So we can do that with smart lighting. A lot of alarm clocks actually will wake you up with light. Folks who are hearing impaired actually have alarm clocks that wake them up with light. Folks that are also in Nordic countries where they don't have actual daytime, nighttime cycles, like 10 o'clock at night, it's still kind of this hazy light color. They use a lot of those. I think Philips actually was one of the ones who started it. Use these special types of alarm clocks to wake people up with light. So ramping that up. And then when we talk about full energized, right, when it's time to work, higher color temperature, more of your light coming from above. For people when they're trying to dip their toes into getting their house closer to a natural environment, closer to what we would call our ideal healthy sort of light, you want to supplement the lights that you have. So look into things like color tunable bulbs. Philips has color tunable bulbs. They're called white ambiance. There is also color tunable bulbs from a couple other manufacturers. And you want those to change throughout the day. It's possible to get them onto what we call routines, where they will change, as well as turning on and off different lights at the sides. So if I'm talking about myself as an example, I have color tunable white lighting in my house. So all of our recessed lighting above changes color based upon essentially the color of the light coming from outside. So it's not just me being an anal designer wanting things to match perfectly. It's also me wanting to make sure that the indoor environment is as close to outside as it can be, because my circadian rhythms are attuned to that. So are those with my family, and even in environments where we don't have any natural light. So like in our basement where there's zero natural light, I actually ramp up the color changing pretty significantly. So my son is immunocompromised. He actually spends a lot of time kind of in the basement. You know, the best way for him to interact with his friends and not be kind of physically exposed and at risk for infection with COVID or anything these days is video games. And so, you know, kind of like, oh gosh, you know, like gamer, he's stuck in like a dark basement, you know, only the light of his screen in front of him. That's not healthy. So for him, I actually have RGBTW, so that's red, green, blue, tunable white LED lighting downstairs. So I actually like mega dose the different colors within the space. So during daytime, it's like full bluish white, and then it actually becomes very golden. This may sound strange that I'm scolding my kids on this, but I did scold him one time when I'm like, dude, it's like 7 o'clock. Your color's wrong. It needs to be golden. Change it right now. So, and he did, and he gets it, because it also keeps him from being just completely screwed up with his own internal cycle.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So, from the perspective, okay, so let me ask you this. So, are you able to mimic the external lighting by, you do it by programming it into do you use your iPhone? How does that work?
So you can just start with one bulb and start to get yourself comfortable. I think one of the things that really intimidates people about smart home technologies is they feel like they have to buy an entire complex system and know how to use it before they even kind of get it in there. Start with one bulb, start small. The thing to keep in mind with all different smart home technologies is you don't have to buy just from one particular source. You know, if you want to add on smart plugs, if you want to add on other things, you can get them from anywhere, as long as you're able to integrate them with a digital assistant, like Alexa, like Google Home. I probably just accidentally activated her in this room, like Apple HomeKit. Those are almost like hair ties for you, right? So when you start up any new technology, you kind of do it in their own proprietary app, but you don't want to have to use 12 apps to change the lighting in your living room. That's not a good thing. So once those guys are in there, it'll automatically pull into your digital assistant, and that's where you program something called routines. So the routines are those things where you say, at this time of day, I want this light to come on at this intensity, at this color, and I want it to ramp up over 15 minutes. So it's almost imperceptible to the eye. That's kind of an ideal circumstance, and you'll program multiple routines throughout the day so those lights do change on either a timed basis. You can synchronize them to sun up, sun down, and you can also synchronize them to voice commands. So for instance, at night, you know, I tell her, my Amazon friend, that it is good night. I know, right? All of a sudden the lights will change because this is a smart room. That all of our lights turn off everywhere. Our white noise machine in the master bedroom turns on. Again, you know, we're trying to approximate the outdoor environment. It's not perfectly quiet when you're sleeping outdoors. We all know this from camping, right? And all of our hallway lights go down to like a night light scene, and then our perimeter lights on the house. So think of all our, like, you know, lights at the doors, things like that, go up to 100%. So it also
the perimeter. So see, this is really awesome. So you're lighting from, you know, top, from the, you know, recessed lighting. You're lighting from the sides. You're also lighting from the, you know, from the sides and also from below.
Correct.
And then on top of that, you're creating light on the exterior of your home.
Correct. You know, from a security standpoint, it's actually a big deal. So,
yes, of course.
And you know, also, I mean, safety. Like, right, if you're even if you're approaching the house, right? My wife uses that command. I happen to be out late, you know, coming home from the airport. I could drive up and the house is lit up for me, right? So there are benefits to that. I think the other thing too that people forget is the benefit to lighting up the outdoor landscape environment. So this does not necessarily jive as much with the circadian rhythm, because we are exposing ourselves to, albeit low levels of light within the outside environment during the nighttime. However, it does activate that whole visuals of the natural environment. And that is a big thing. The more nature that we can actually visually bring into our eyes, the better. So it will change your experience outdoors. You're sitting on the deck, you don't have just this blank slate of just total darkness. Your views actually go out to the rest of the yard. They can even go out to what we call borrowed landscape. So if you're illuminating, a tree that might be hanging over from a neighbor's yard, it's not your landscape, but you're getting the benefit of illuminating it and appreciating it within your space. So beautiful.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
So the view of beautiful natural environments, even if they're slightly artificial, can be incredibly calming.
Right.
I think it even goes down to color theory. If you continually ask why our bodies react to things, you can always go back to, in some ways, survival. So why is it that greenish tones within space, and you have to be careful about how you use them, but greenish tones tend to lower the blood pressure. They tend to make us feel more relaxed. Why is that? If we naturally, as like a hunter-gatherer, are within a wooded environment, it means there's plenty of food, right? Because we have plenty of plants that are nearby. It means there's water, because if the plants are green and they're growing, they have water. It also means that there's shelter, right? So green, we evolved to see green as something that is safe, that's going to make us feel a little bit safer. Same thing with blue. Blue is very calming because, again, abundant water means it's not stressful. Red is the color of blood. It's also, so that's kind of an alarming sort of alert sort of thing. Tends to bring blood pressures up, make people feel a little bit more, in some cases, agitated. So the natural environment, again, is going to give us cues as to how we want our interior spaces to be. I specifically chose, not just from a lighting standpoint, but from a coloration standpoint, that I wanted a sense of being kind of like outdoors in a forested grove in our living room, because this is the place where we're hosting the majority of people. Like when they come in, it's more of a public space. It also is a darker shade because it makes us feel as if we're more sheltered. So that sort of warmth within there, along with the lighting, makes people feel automatically calm when they're in the space.
So you're in your living room. What color are you projecting? How are you?
So and
how are you layering it? Like, tell me about.
So when we're hosting, the colors are much more of a golden color. So we're talking 2700K or lower. So like 2200K, these are much more golden colors. Think about like candlelight.
As opposed to 5000K.
As opposed to 5000K, because that's, when you walk into a space, it's bluish, and at nighttime, it tends to give more of the impression of like a convenience store or a gas station,
CVS,
and that's not great for a cocktail party. So we have the color temperature fairly low. We do have an overall glow that's coming from above, but that actually tends to be at its lowest level throughout any of the cycles throughout the day. The majority of our glow is actually coming from that perimeter that we were talking about. So we're approximating the sunset. So I have table lights, I have task lights that are projecting light just on surfaces on the couch, as well as those small little ambient sort of decorative, what some people call like sparkle lights, where it's just like a small votive sort of thing that's glowing in a bookshelf, another one that's on our credenza. So because we have all those multiple light sources, we've reduced a lot of shadow, which is a good thing, right? You don't want a whole bunch of moody shadows in the space unless that's what you're really going for. But also, even with people's appearances, if you don't have shadow kind of underneath and you have light instead coming from the sides, this is one of those things that we learned during COVID with those ring lights, right? When we're doing so many Zoom. Totally. If the light is coming up towards this, it helps to minimize wrinkles, it helps to minimize dark circles. So people are feeling attractive, people are looking attractive, and the space itself is designed to be comfortable.
You can also, I imagine, and also, like you said, it affects our mood because we're viewing people clearly.
Exactly. I mean, and lighting candles is a good thing, actually. Or, even digital versions of those where you're seeing that small little bit of kinetic motion. Again, the outside world isn't still. So if we're doing things that are showing movement within the space, that also makes people feel calmer. So one of the, if it's a candle that is showing movement, that's better than something that's static, but something static is better than nothing. So I cannot tell you how many times we've had friends over for parties and they say, like, every time I come to your house I just feel so relaxed. I'm like, I know, and I know exactly why. So it's intentional.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to come to your house. I want to
I
see
know,
how you
right?
design
We'll
that.
have to have you over.
Yeah, I want to kind of like record it. You know,
Yeah,
I'm
no,
curious to see
we can
that.
definitely do that.
Okay.
Although it's probably less impressive than you might think. We have a fixer upper. So
Okay. So let's see here. We spoke about just about all of this.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about dimmers. So dimmers are like a halfway to smart home, right?
Okay.
So with smart home stuff, we can fix the intensity, that volume knob, the color, which is that song. With dimmers, we only can get half of that, right? We're sort of at the mercy of the color temperature of the light. One thing to keep in mind is most LED lights right now are not what we call color dynamic. Old-fashioned bulbs, because they were burning, have a dynamic color temperature, which means that as the intensity increases, so does the color temperature. So think about a halogen light bulb, for instance. You have it at its highest color temperature, and that's around 3000 K, maybe getting a little higher. And then as you lower the intensity, as you dim it, it gets more and more like a candle until it goes all the way down to around 2000, maybe even slightly lower than that. LEDs don't have that. The LEDs aren't really burning in a way. So, so LEDs stay the exact same color temperature with that intensity. There are bulbs that are now coming on the market. We're starting to carry them that are usually called like warm glow or warm dim. And you can even specify warm dim recessed lights with LEDs where they will change their color temperature and they will lower them as you bring the intensity down. That's a good thing, right?
Yes, yeah, that's what I want.
That is halfway to kind of like our ideal state. Again, the ideal state being you have that full spectrum of white light, so we can mimic what's happening outdoors.
Does Philips Hue offer that?
Philips Hue does.
Okay.
So does Wiz. And then Philips has just the individual. Philips Hue carries two products. One is the full total spectrum, right, where you can have blue light, purple light, pink, whatever. A lot of folks don't necessarily want that or need that in the space. So they do have what they call color ambiance. So that is just the white, or white ambiance rather, just the white colors. So bluish white all the way down to very golden. This sort of warm glow bulb is a new technology and is able to approximate filament bulbs. So filament bulbs are tricky, right? Within a bulb, if you have a lens over it, it'll mix together all the lights from all the different color LEDs that it's mixing together to create that final color. Think of it like a painter's palette, right?
Oh, okay.
So you have red, green, and blue. That's usually how any sort of light is blended. That's called additive color, whereas if you're using paints, it's subtractive. That's getting technical, so you can edit that out. But all of our monitors and screens use red, green, and blue. Typically, they'll mix them with some white LEDs, and just the amounts that they turn on each one of those will determine the color of the light that comes out. So you usually can have millions of colors of options. The white ones just include the colors of LEDs, usually the red, yellow, blue, and white, to mix together to create those white colors. So the technology is getting more advanced. As I said, with each one of those LEDs within those reflectors, they mix them all together. Filament bulbs, where you're seeing the source of the light, is super tricky, right? So
filament meaning like a light bulb with electricity is causing it to burn,
Exactly.
and then it eventually goes out.
Right.
Yeah.
So Edison bulbs are really, really
Thomas
popular
Edison,
right now.
yeah.
So whenever the bulb is not frosted and when it's clear and you can see what that source of light is, becomes tricky.
Right.
Fairly recently, they were able to do LED filament bulbs where you see, the LEDs are small little cylinders. They look like a filament. They do a pretty good job. They're not dynamic with the color temperature. So because it's just one LED that's in there.
Yeah. So
Philips has found a way of incorporating multiple LEDs into those filaments, which it will balance. So you can have something that looks like a filament bulb that gets kind of warmer in color, lower in color temperature when it dims, and you can see it in that bulb. You can have that sort of decorative aspect to it. So that's fairly new. It's something that we carried. There are other folks who had multiple filaments where it was like a super blue filament and a super golden filament, and they would dim them on and off. It looked terrible. I would never bring that into the showroom because it's not particularly convincing. This is a good option though. So it can be just as simple as replacing a light bulb within your house, all the way up to building a full smart home rig. I don't know if rig's the right term for it. It makes it sound very technical.
Design.
A full smart home design.
Yeah. What I love about these smart bulbs, I would call them, is that you can control it from your phone and then connect it all together, which to create the
the routine.
The routines.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone's really conversant too with smartphones, and there are two big things that I like about smart home technologies right now. They're decentralized, which means that you don't have one central computer that's controlling everything. So if that breaks down, you have no lights.
It's a hub, right?
It's just a hub that connects to the internet. So you're able to add small little components. If one bulb fails, you just replace that one bulb. Most people really hate some of these. They call them. It was like a graphic eye where everything has, or some of the early smart home dimming systems called HomeWorks, where you have to have this dedicated like AV room. It's super expensive. You want to change something, you got to call a guy out and wait days and pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars. This, you just change a bulb. If you decide that you want to add landscape lighting, you just add that to the system.
Right.
The other benefit is that the software is constantly updating. So, as much as your phone updates, those apps update as well. So they're constantly improving it. So again, it's not something built into your house that becomes obsolete. The system itself will continually update.
Yeah, and what's cool about that is these updates, they include they'll actually create a routine for you.
Yeah.
Like a morning routine, an afternoon routine, a night routine.
Yeah, and
so you don't have to figure it out yourself. It's
they can totally do that.
Yeah,
so there are things that we otherwise call recipes that they will include for you, and then they'll add in additional functionality. They'll do things. There's a term called geofence, which think of it as an invisible fence. Around any location. You can do that around your house. So as your phone approaches that fence, it will trigger a routine in your house. Your outdoor lights will come up.
Awesome.
From a security standpoint, it's great. From a safety standpoint, it's also great.
Love it. Okay. So let's. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? We're just going to keep it going, but
Yeah.
I do want to talk about your overall. Passion or motivation or really the love you have for your son, and that situation, if you could kind of delve into what inspired you to make this amazing basement lighting that you did for your son, and how it mimics the lighting of the rest of the world, the external lighting.
So I'll actually go one quick 30-second thing further.
Yes, please.
So I am not originally trained in lighting. I'm actually trained as an industrial designer, and most people think of that as an object. I was trained in a version that deals with space, and the reason that I chose space was I wanted to control everything. I knew how important a cohesive experience. Well, it's also, if I'm really going to create something that is immersive, we have all these senses that we're dealing with. I wanted to design for all the senses. If you just design a table, you're just designing a portion, right? It's one instrument in the symphony. So I wanted to be the conductor, right? To do all that stuff. Yeah. One of the things that drove that was light, believe it or not, because it does impact so many different things. I was born and grew up in Hawaii. Okay. And so when you think about that, you think of tropical environment, super fancy.
Where is that along? Is that near
It's right
DC?
near the equator.
Right near the equator.
It's right near the equator, which means light is a big part of it.
Yeah.
And you are also dealing with such a high level of variation in the light throughout the day. So it's not just through the seasons, but it's throughout the day where extreme amounts of light. You're out on the water, you're getting light reflected back up at you. There's a lot of blue light, a lot of exposure to the sun, so vitamin D, and in my case, sun damage because we were not very careful. But it made me very sensitive to light, and even my mom was super sensitive to it. So we always had candlelight at dinner. She couldn't handle lots and lots of light from above because she was exposed to it so much during the day. So I was already primed kind of right out of the gate to be very sensitive to light and what it could do because I felt it, right? It was so extreme that I could feel it and articulate it. So when I do get into situations like I'm dealing with my son who, being immunocompromised is indoor a lot, it means that I want to also take care of him and expose him to as much of a good experience indoors as possible. So there's definitely the health aspect of it, right? There's the, making sure that the light that we have in there is attuned to his circadian rhythm, so we're not throwing him off, because he does need to interact with the outside world, and everyone else has the same sleep wake patterns. And I think the other thing too is just to create a beautiful environment. If you're home, and we actually saw this a lot during COVID, you want this to be your safe place. You want this to be a place where you feel it is the safest, most beautiful place in the world, because who knows what's happening outside? We also don't know if we're going to have to go into quarantine again. We don't know. So that's one of the reasons why we focus so much on making our spaces a safe haven, a place where it's warm, a place where we feel good being, and also, you know, a place that we're not bored of, that we're getting exposed to lots of different stimuli throughout the day. So that's why change is important. That's why making the space beautiful is important. That's why making the space healthy is important, because we could be there for a really long time.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Matt and I are going to work on in terms of providing packages for designing homes so that you can have that immersive experience at your home.
Yep.
It's very, very important. You know, going back to the reality that you know, when you're in your home, it's everything is impacting your health, everything is impacting your mood, and it is something that you know, that we hope to provide.
It is critical. I mean, we're all organisms, and I think the one thing that I will say is all of us sense the same stuff. There's no difference between me and the regular sort of person on the street. We're all sensing the same things. The difference is, being a designer, I might be a little bit more sensitive to it, but I also know how to articulate it. I'm able to say, here's why we're feeling this way, here's why this changed, and if we want to actually make it better, here's how we can do it. That's the difference. So again, you know, I'm just like everyone else, except my profession is being able to tweak our environment.
Yeah, and it's true. It's kind of like when I'm selling a home. One of the things that, you know, I really lean into is the reality that when people purchase a home, it's kind of like it's an impulsive thing. They base their decision on how they feel about the home. And so, you know, this is why, you know, tweaking the home, you know, adding the appropriate amount of lighting, which is actually a huge part of prepping homes nowadays. Most people don't have enough lighting, and it's not, you know, designed correctly. Aside from that, of course, staging it, and then when someone walks in that home and they get that great feeling, they're going to make an offer. You're going to make an offer, and the same for us. When we're living in that space and we love it, we're going to, you know, it's going to enhance the quality of our lives. So, but yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, I will say, like, you're absolutely right. Homes are also aspirational, right? When someone is searching for a home, it's not who they are now, it's who they want to be, right? It's who they want to be in the future. They want to visualize themselves in it, but it's like, I want to be this. So that's why, again, staging is so important. But the light is so important too. And I think that's one thing that we sometimes forget, even with staging, right? If it's just light that's coming from above, people go in the space and like, well, it's bright, but it feels off. Like, I can tell them why it feels off, right? You know, the lighting's not great. And you can immediately change that stuff because there's no hard construction. It's not even bringing in new furniture, which is like onerous and kind of like cumbersome. It's just getting those light levels right. It doesn't mean always blast as much light as you can into the space. So, and also be sensitive of when you're showing.
Right.
You know, that's why it could be great to have like a routine that's even just set up for showing.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
So throughout the day, you know, during the middle of the day, great. The space is kind of bright and airy because it matches with the out of doors. When you walk into a home and you're showing the home at night, you know, after the sun has gone down, make it warm and inviting. It would be so much better to show a house in almost like cocktail party mode, where it is at its most flattering. You know, maybe some of the imperfections are glossed over by, you know, a more golden flattering light. And if people are actually even seeing who they're walking the space with in a more flattering light, you know, we mirror each other. If someone's looking more attractive, we feel more attractive as well. And then you see yourself in this environment. It's all about visualization.
Tap into that.
Totally.
That's huge. That's huge. Would you mind going into the comprehensiveness and the care that you took in designing the basement that your son spends most of his time in? Is that where his room is? Is that where?
No, his room's upstairs, but he spends the majority of his time in the basement, which, you know, as I mentioned before, it does not have any natural light sources.
Right. So it's fully underground.
It's fully underground, fully shut off. So, you know, it could be a cave. And I think the other thing too that we're dealing with within the most basement situation is a lower ceiling height. So it also becomes tricky from a lighting standpoint. One of the things that we're always trying to avoid with lighting is glare. And from a lighting design standpoint, glare is whenever you can see that source of light. So most of the fixtures that like a contractor will put in when they're renovating a basement are, you know, just the standard 5-inch cans. They're those BR30 bulbs. They're kind of like those frosted reflector bulbs, but they usually protrude a lot. So your eyes are kind of drawn to this source of light that's like really close to your face, and it already sets up a bad experience. What it also means when you have a lower ceiling is that the light isn't spilling as much onto the walls, which means you only have these pools of light on the floor. It tends to create what I jokingly call kind of like a hostage video lighting situation, which no one wants to feel good about. So with my son's space instead in the basement, one, I wanted to do everything that I could to reduce glare, and that means using the right lighting fixtures that are recessed enough into the ceiling so that you don't see where they're coming from. The other thing is I took a cue from airline design. So those are cramped, claustrophobic spaces. You're jammed in there with a whole bunch of people. What do they do to make it seem brighter and airier? They have lots of indirect lighting sources that are hidden in any little crevice that they have above, those overhead luggage compartments, below, kind of raking the sides of the
like
space.
crown molding, maybe.
Exactly. So there are a lot of places actually that we can hide light within the space. And basements are troublesome from a design standpoint because you're dealing with a lot of weird stuff in the construction. You have low beams that are impeding circulation in the space. You have these weird ducts that you have to deal with. Those are your opportunities for lighting. You embrace them and make them something that seems intentional within the space. So if there's a beam, create a ledge. Hide LED lighting in that ledge and allow it to wash across the space. So your light in the space is not coming from just one point, right? It's coming from the entire surface of the ceiling above you.
Love it.
So,
would you do like a light strip for that type of lighting?
Yeah, so we use tape lighting.
Okay.
So tape lighting is pretty amazing, and this is one of those things that LED technology has afforded us. They come in reels. Typically, it's about 16 feet plus or minus a reel. And the great thing is they're field cuttable. So what that means is if you have a 16-foot long reel, you don't have to figure out what to do with that extra end. There are points at which you can actually cut it. They're low voltage, which means that they run from a transformer. So all you really need is a plug or a line voltage source to plug into the transformer. They are, you can get color tunable, which is fantastic. They don't produce a lot of heat, but they put out a lot of light. And those tape lights, because they're so small, you can fit them almost anywhere, and they come with peel-off tape on the back. So the whole thing is ready to stick to any surface that you can get it, and you can kind of be sloppy when you install it.
Especially if you're hiding it. Yeah.
So it's totally hidden, so it can be a little wonky. You do want to be careful with how you position it so that there aren't too many overlaps, because that will mean that there will be some spots that are brighter than others, and it won't be even. And maybe you want that, and maybe that's an intentional move, but again, any tiny little crack that you build into the space, even as thick as a single layer of drywall, will give you a surface that will allow you to project light onto other surfaces. So in the basement, for instance, I have it washing the ceiling on one side. I had to build this bulkhead around because we had ducts. We had like a return air duct on one side that was super weird. We had a radon abatement, which also air quality.
Yes, air quality.
Big thing that's important
basements.
within the space. And then the back wall, actually, we use as a surface to wash with light. So I think a lot of folks think light only comes from the ceiling. We want light to actually come from the walls. So that also afforded us this opportunity so that the space that can feel really claustrophobic and cramped, low ceiling, all of a sudden seems expansive and airy when we light it correctly. Which again, I mean, it's now that we know that we can use light in this way, we can have a space that you want to be in, as opposed to it's kind of like that, gross space that like only the kids play in, or you begrudgingly put your guests in during the holidays. So basements can be pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Excellent. Okay, and so you've in your son's basement, you put the I imagine you have lamps. You have the lighting that's hidden that kind of like reflects on the walls and on the ceiling. You have the recessed lighting. You program it all together, and it creates an immersive, like external type experience.
Yeah, and there are different scenes too. So depending on what's happening in the space. So if we're watching a movie, that sort of thing. But yeah, the color changes throughout the day to mimic the outdoor environment. The other thing too is I really didn't put any recessed lights within the space except for the one spot that I wanted a pool of light, and that's just above the coffee table. All the rest of the space, the back portion of that space is used as a workout area, and you don't want glare, and your body's going to be in a lot of different positions, lying down on a bench. The last thing that you want is light shining directly into your eyes from that. So that's where indirect lighting is critically important. Also changing that color temperature. It's much better to have kind of like an invigorating sort of like crisp blue that helps to kind of visually keep you cool. And then, with cool down, maybe it's something that you treat it more like a sauna environment where it becomes kind of an orangier sort of thing. Again, you want to bring your blood pressure and your heart rate down. You get to that sunset sort of color temperature when you don't want to have a lot of energy, right? You want to be.
I love this. Is it's funny you're talking about this because I was curious about that in terms of like creating a workout space in your home.
Yeah.
And so you're saying work on the hidden lighting that reflects off the walls.
Exactly.
High temperature,
Yep.
and then you can control it to make it more of a golden.
When it's time to cool down.
When it's time to cool down. Okay.
So I mean, that's really important.
That's an interesting.
Right? No, and I think
I love it. Yeah.
Fitness is a big thing, right? We want to control what's happening with our bodies. So the one thing that I have seen is we've been into people's workout rooms, and they pretty much design the room like they would any other room in their house, right? So they have kind of like a dark beige wall, and they have kind of dark wood floors. That's actually the opposite of what you want to do, because lighting is going to be so critical to that experience. Treat your walls almost as projection surfaces. So crisp white, because that is the most flexible sort of color that you can put in the space when you change that lighting color. If you're projecting a red tone against a kind of a brown wall, you really don't get much of that effect. So again, make the room as kind of clean and crisp visually as possible, and then that allows you to also change that experience so much more effectively.
Yeah.
And it's just white. I mean, white's easy.
Well, white's easy. You're right. That's one of the reasons why most spaces are now being designed in white. It just makes it, especially with lighting, you can change the color of the wall by changing the color of the light.
And it completely, it changes your feeling. It is so funny. So I will say, like, the space that we're in right now is the light lab. So within the overall rest of the showroom, we treat it like a gallery, but in a way we're treating it as a gallery for sculpture, with the lighting fixtures being the sculpture. So those other environments outside are designed to sell kind of the object of lighting. And here it's all about the effect. So we've built 3 scenes into it. They're all voice command. One is where we show you the typical spec house. The other is what we call, good lighting. I'm leading the witness with the name of it, but we call good lighting where we've actually changed the lighting to be very intentional with how we place it. The color temperature goes down a little bit more. And then the last one is our evening setting. So we just lower those levels. Through people being in the room and viscerally feeling those 3 things, they get it. It's really important when we talk about things that are otherwise abstract, like lighting, that we are showing, not just saying. And once people feel it, they kind of leave this room, and it's just within a series of 3 different scenes as lighting snobs. They're like, oh, well, I'm going to go home and you're going to ruin my house, right? I'm going to look at all the things that are wrong. Now that I've felt the difference between great lighting and really intentional designed lighting, you won't go back. I mean, it's kind of Pandora's out of the box. And as much as that might seem like it's a tricky thing that we're trying to do from a sales standpoint, we're actually really doing it from an altruistic standpoint. If we can expose people to lighting that is not just more beautiful, but is healthier for them to be around, we want people to have that at home. That's where we take our job really seriously. We are impacting the most important place in that person's life. Home is always that anchor, right? It's the planet around which everything else in life orbits. It's where the best stuff happens, the worst stuff happens. We want that to be a beautiful and safe and healthy environment.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely.